references this morning to the mysterious energy which makes up the aura, and I'll be talking about that some. We also talked about the Kundalini. In my first book, I proposed the idea that it does involve a synchronization of the chakras, and I heard some support for that in the speaker this morning. What I really want to talk about here is the mysterious idea of how does long-range healing work? What is this connection that Imans was talking about? How are we able to connect with others very far away, seemingly independent of distance? Doesn't seem to take a whole lot of energy or anything else. It happens pretty easily once we're able to couple in. So how can we explain that? Well, let's back up a little bit. First, there are other areas of physics where also we have puzzles, which of course is one of the purposes of this society. One area involves gravity, the nature of space-time metric. You've heard talks about that here, dark matter and dark energy. These are certainly important areas for physics to puzzle out. There are examples that have not yet been fixed, as far as I'm aware, in conventional physics, where during solar eclipses, pendula often swing off at surprising angles, the work of Allais, Saxel, etc. So there are these areas that suggest that our present physics is not complete. Satellite orbits depart from prediction. Lageos, Pioneer, Ulysses, people have referred to that earlier in this session. Charge clusters, another area where it's well demonstrated that at very high concentrations of charge, the Coulomb repulsion that should be there seems to stop working, which is presumably a zero-point phenomenon, but is one more clue that our understanding of things, of space-time and the metric and things at very small scales and under extreme conditions is not well understood. Poponin and Garayev have done these demonstrations that the vacuum itself can have non-ground state conditions. In other words, not just one ground state of the vacuum where everything is empty. In fact, by shining a laser at a container of DNA and then pulling out everything so there's no traces of anything left, there's an energetic contaminant that remains that has periodicity to it, that's shown by the lower graph. So basically they're creating excited states of the vacuum, which sound a little bit like prana or some of the other hypothesized aspects of subtle energy. So these are just demonstrations that our current understanding of physics may still have some things to learn. Another area where we are encountering puzzles and anomalies is consciousness. Of course, quantum physics was supposed to be based on the idea that the consciousness causes wave function collapse. That's already a key that consciousness does affect physics, but mainstream physics has kind of neglected doing research on that for the last 100 years. So now we're coming to a time where consciousness effects are so strong, we can see the effects in the lab, measure them. The PAIR Lab, the Global Consciousness Project, as Roger Nelson talked before, Dean Radin's work, all of these show that consciousness can have measurable effects on physics. They don't weaken with distance. The PAIR Lab cumulative odds against chance are now running trillions to 1, which says these are real effects if you have enough examples to run. And yet our physics still cannot explain them. Bob John's wonderful conclusion from some of this data is all forces known to physics, like gravity, for example, diminish with distance, and no forces in physics operate freely across time like this. It's as if consciousness is somehow able to direct its influence directly across space and time. An understanding that certainly, I agree, poses a challenge to science. We also see anomalous long-range effects with healers. And Imans was talking about that a little bit in the previous talk. When you go to trained healers who have spent maybe a lifetime doing this, such as the QIGONG masters of China, the effects can be dramatic and striking. One of the most famous is Dr. Yan Xin of China, a QIGONG master, also a medical doctor. during a chi projection lecture where he's teaching people how he does his projection of chi. Physics students in China at the Institute set up lithium fluoride detectors around the room, which are used in particle experiments normally. But they found that they were able to detect effects from his chi. The blue line at about his waist level in the little diagram shows the background level of count rate that they were getting with lithium fluoride detectors. When he projected with his hands, empty force, basically sending chi in different directions, according to him, the count rates went up by a factor of 20. When he will attempt to do the same thing influencing water, you get changes in the bonding structure of the water, which shows up on Raman spectra. The bottom curve here shows what the spectra looks like after 2 hours, and that's pretty close to the resting state of the Raman spectra for that frequency range. But for shorter times, the top curve is 30 minutes, you get huge departures from the normal Raman spectrum. And these effects don't really depend on distance. You can do this from thousands of miles away as well as in the next room. QIGONG affects radioactive decay rate, another thing that's a surprise to physicists. This is americium, and they have two different types of detectors, and they found that the same 1,900 kilometers away, he was also able to either increase or decrease the decay rate of the element using his chi. Dr. JOIE Jones, University of California, Irvine, as you probably know, has been doing studies of pranic healing, one more form of energy projection or energy healing, and finds that if you expose cell cultures to high doses of gamma radiation, he adjusts it so about half of them die in 24 hours. So the left bar here is 50% surviving in 24 hours. The right bars are all for different conditions, either send pranic healing, which is like chi, before the exposure to gamma, or after exposure, or both. And each one of them gets higher and higher survival rate after 24 hours. And the highest one was next to the far right, about 88% survival after 24 hours. This is hundreds of experiments over many years. He said he was still bothered. I thought this is fantastic healing data. He was still bothered by what was missing. One day it occurred to him, maybe it's karma. And during the experiments, he had his lab assistant phone in a contribution, a credit card contribution to a charity, and with the intention that the good karma from that act would go to the cells, and the survival rate went to 96%, and for 100 trials remained there. So we have the first experimental demonstration of karma. So the point is that these long-range healing experiments produce strong results if the practitioners are themselves very powerful, very strong, very well trained. Another Qigong master, Jixing Li, that I know and have met and had an experience with him, did experiments with Dr. John Neely at Penn State. Jixing Li was in California. The cell cultures were cancer cells set up in an incubator in Penn State, Hershey. The left curve here shows the growth rate of the cancer cells when left alone. They're increasing over time. The right set of curves, there's three curves there. One of them is also another petri dish in the same incubator that Jixing Li was not trying to affect. The other two were petri dishes he was asked to attempt to affect by killing the cancer cells 2,000 miles away. Cancer cells in Pennsylvania, he is in California, and you can see the growth curves turn over, and they went back to zero after a while. So he showed demonstration of the ability to aim his energy very precisely from thousands of miles away and cause measurable effects. Both of these types of phenomena, anomalies in the space-time metrics such as gravity and effects of consciousness, can both be traced to the presence of a unique kind of energy. It's been called chi, prana, subtle energy, the life force, many other names. Recognized in many ancient traditions, it's been overlooked in Western science until recently. when a yogi or a QIGONG master starts his work, he attempts to build up a concentration of this energy in his body. You may call it pranayama, a special kind of energy. Time travels awfully fast in this lecture. So it correlates with, so the presence of this energy correlates with these unusual phenomena. That's really the bottom line here. To explain some of these existing anomalies, physics needs to include this energy. We need a science for this. I have written a new book. It's about a 7-year effort pulling together results from von Reichenbach, Schauberger, Reich, Tiller, the Russian Torsion scientists, Chinese medicine, many different sources. It's called Life Force, the Scientific Basis, where I pull together these different things, cross-compare them to attempt to figure out what is the commonality in terms of this force. How does it behave in many different conditions? It's a big book, 720 pages, 1,500 references, a lot of work, and there are some basic principles that come from out of that work. One of the most interesting areas I'll talk today very, very briefly about is torsion, which is the Russian name for this energy. They discovered it in the hard sciences, astrophysics. They concluded, Nikolai Kozyrev was the person in the 1950s who originated the idea this stuff exists. It's basically a coupling between spins that it appears to be generated when particles shift their spin. It's like a radiation form, but it's weaker than electromagnetism. It involves conservation of basically angular momentum. And a lot of the papers we have came during the glasnost and perestroika years of the early 90s, when a lot of the restrictions against classified publications relaxed for a few years. A lot of these things came flooding out. Things have tightened up since then, and the situation has reversed. But they have fully developed equations, patents, experiments, devices. A lot of work went into this. Here's a quote from one of their torsion scientists. From the late 80s to the late 90s, major experimental investigations were conducted that confirmed the theoretical predictions. It was established that torsion generators allow us not only to replicate all phenomena demonstrated by so-called psychics, but they are also able to demonstrate effects that were never demonstrated by any psychic. In other words, the Russians have concluded that torsion is the same thing as what we talk about as psychic energy, psychic phenomena. There were some big programs. One scientist, Jacques Perronneau, talks about applied research he was doing in '91 that involved 8 different scientific teams and 30 years of research coordinated in his effort. There are a variety of different, namely dozens of different types of anomalies in physics which have been observed over the years that appear to be explainable by torsion. There have been internet attacks recently to some of these scientists. My interpretation is the Russians perhaps regret that this stuff became public and want to pull it back, but that's up to anyone to make their own judgment as far as what's going on there. There are enormous numbers of scientists and a real track record over decades that this stuff is real and has been receiving a lot of research. The basic idea can be viewed in different ways. One way is to say that Einstein's equations really described point particles, but did not focus much on the spin or the orientation of the particle. When you include that, you add additional terms to the equations. There's a static form of torsion that occurs when an object is spinning. The more important and more dynamic form of torsion occurs when spins flip or spins change direction. It's a very common thing. It happens all the time. In electromagnetism, when we create an EM wave, a photon, the particle is changing its spin during part of that. Therefore, torsion waves are created along with, I'm sorry, what was the time? 1, thank you. Torsion waves are created sort of synchronously with the photons. And that is essentially, there are a lot of experiments that have shown that during irreversible processes, evaporation of acetone is one here, it creates these torsion energies. There's 2 forms. One goes to the right, one goes to the left. One basically speeds up time. It involves, the 2 have 2 different polarities of entropy involved with them. And I'm going to have to kind of skip over a lot of this really interesting stuff. But let's see. They have one acts as a repelling force while one acts as an attracting force. So they seem to be a possible explanation for the nature of dark matter and dark energy. And see if I can cut quickly to the chase in the limited time available. It's all in my book, so if you are able and interested in purchasing it, this is explained in a much more leisurely way. But the bottom line is we have a biophoton field in our bodies. The DNA creates it. It's how the DNA in the body couples and creates a coherent field of electromagnetic energy, photon energy in the body that guides the cell growth. Coupled to that is a torsion field. Every time there's a photon field inside the body, there's a torsion field created outside the body. It's the torsion field that really creates what we call the aura. It's also the connection between two people when remote healing is done. It's really the interaction of the torsion field. I guess I'm going to have to stop there before the hook comes out. But anyway.
Thank you, Claude. Carl, you're up if you're...
Yes, Claude, earlier Imants mentioned selection from a superposition. Might torsion fields be involved in that?
Yes. There's a model at the back of my book which basically proposes that when we are involved in doing long-range healing with someone, the thing about torsion that makes it unusual, it requires very little or no energy, so it's different from photons. It also can travel backwards in time as well as forwards in time, and they actually have detection to show this is a real effect. So if you go back to the Feynman-Wheeler model of physics, where we can send waves forward into the future and also backwards, it allows for four-dimensional holographic connections. So there were references to earlier speakers about the holographic nature of some of these things. To me, torsion is the medium that makes that possible.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Early in your talk, you mentioned that mainstream science more or less ignores the role of consciousness in the collapse of the quantum wave function. And I simply wanted to point out that actually the situation is a good deal worse than that. Mainstream research on the quantum measurement problem has arrived at the consensus that they know what goes on in wave function collapse, and it does not involve conscious observation in any way. Of course, there's a great deal of dispute from various dissidents who disagree with the reasoning involved, but we're very much in the minority. I figure you should be aware of that when you're trying to argue with the mainstream.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the update.
Yeah.
Before Glassrod, I was able to get hold of some of the Soviet work on torsion fields and had that analyzed through some of the groups in the Washington, D.C. area. Unfortunately, the information in the books was not really usable for the people that looked at it, and they kind of gave it a thumbs down, which is not too unexpected.
Right.
But I'm happy to see that there's been a body of knowledge since that time, because intuitively it felt like this is a good direction to go in, and it almost looks like there's something behind how a holographic field is constructed in the concepts that we can develop. So I appreciate your insight.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah.
Hey there. Earlier on, you made the statement that consciousness effects are getting stronger. Do you have data to back that up, or is that due to lab improvement and experimental design improvements that we're able to see them more?
What I meant there is that I think a lot of it has come from access to some very powerful, trained individuals that before we didn't see many papers about. It was mostly the QIGONG masters from China. China has been publishing papers coming out of China, studying these people, and QIGONG masters have come to the U.S. as well. So we're getting access to some people who were just much stronger than just your average person off the street. So.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Is torsion your left brain definition of chi?
In a way, yeah. It's the same thing, as far as I'm concerned. I think as we get to understand this stuff better, we'll probably have finer gradations of wording, but a lot of lot of the confusion so far has been that because it's a relatively subtle force and it's come out of different cultures, different individuals, and it manifests itself in different ways because it really does affect the space-time metric, and therefore it affects almost every other physical process. So it manifests as different types of effects. So Wilhelm Reich calls it orgone, and different people who discover it in different formats give it a different name, but I think at the core it's the same thing.
Talking about the same thing.
I think so.
last question.
Hi, Claude. I'm glad to hear your book was published.
Thank
first
you.
of all. Quick question, looking at the diagrams for the torsion field with the angular energy being generated, it looks like something that would be relatively easy to measure or to observe or to at least predict. Is there, so where is, yeah.
Well, in my book, I talk about a lot of measurements, okay? It's several orders of magnitude weaker than electromagnetic effects, and it's often masked by thermal effects or other types of phenomena. So typically, the experiments that are published involve some very careful elimination of other confusing or competing effects. I think it's probably possible to develop devices that are directly to measure the spin flip, but I don't have a model for that yet. So
Okay.
still working. I don't have a good model for detectors yet.